recording has started. So, as to your question, I think you are kind of guiding to that. You're kind of like the difference between this, let's say, difference between when there's exports here and when the export is not there, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, when you do something like this particular variable only exists within any instance here you run. Let's say um somewhere in my file, like somewhere in this main.py. Shit. Okay. Somewhere in this main.py, let's say this is a complex file somewhere in this main.py, or let's just say I was actually, let's say I kind of did imports OS, or let's say OS import it. And so let's just say I do something like this now. Now, if I run the get env and then I kind of do something like this, py and then let's see, I then save it to a variable called file. Okay, let's just say I do something like this. Oh, sorry, let me admit someone. Okay, okay. So then I'll have to remove this guy here. And then, yep. Okay, so now let's just say I do something like this now, and I then do something like py goes to um let's just say, let me actually make it a variable. Let's just say my SQL, because that's the best thing I could think of right now. And then just say my SQL user, rather. My SQL user should be Sammy. Now let's just say then um I then run this now. Now, if you know that inside this particular main.py, what is actually there is py file. So let's just assume that that py file is actually my SQL user. So inside this particular that py file, or inside this particular main.py, if I run this, what that get env is actually going to do is actually just going to get this particular value, because this particular variable, it's just going to exist within this particular instance. That's just the difference. However, if you add the export, if you add the export parameter or the export keyword to it, both this instance and other future instance can still use, let me just make this unique, same. Now, both this particular instance and other instance can still use this particular variable called py file. But if I don't add this export keyword to it, only this particular instance can use this variable py file. And then once this is done running, it will just go out of existence, something like that. Other future commands I want to run won't be able to use this. Do you get the difference now?
Okay, yes, yes.
Yes, we do.
All right. I think you will still need this when you are doing the Airbnb. I don't know. I think it's the part that has to do with the MySQL part, whereby you then create your MySQL username, the username, password, the host machine, then you just pass it directly to your modules that you want to run. Then inside the same modules, you still have then you have something like this. However, this part, so yeah, so you then have something like this from OS imports this, then you can still do, let's just say, then you do something like import squilacking and so on and so forth. Okay, so I have a Python script right now, and I will need to save this to an environmental variable. Now, because I can actually see a pound sign here, or sorry, a dollar symbol here, it therefore means that there's actually going to be an expansion. Like if you do something like this now, you see now that this particular variable home is actually expanded. The shell is actually going to expand it because it's actually seeing this particular dollar symbol. And I think this should not be strange to us because we kind of did this in system engineering DevOps back then in onboarding session. That should be shell variables and expansions in its files, something like that. Yeah. So and if you still look closely, this same particular home is still somewhere around here in this my list of global variables. Yeah, yes, right here. You can see. Come on. Now you can see it here. So instead of me actually saying echo forward slash home forward slash vagrant, when I did when I did this echo home, this particular dollar symbol basically told my shell interpreter right here, which is bash in this case, to just actually, instead of print echoing home like this, instead of doing echo, probably I then do something like this. Instead of doing something like echo home, I then want it to I then want it to actually give me the what this home variable is actually pointing to. And it's still the same thing as me doing something like this. You can see both actually gave me the same thing. So if you check so if you actually check the question there, you see that you actually have a pound sign symbol there. So it's actually going to tell you that you're actually going to create a global variable. Now to create that particular global variable, you just have to use the export keyword and then call this python, then pass in the value. Please, no spaces, not like your normal way you do something like this. No, it's actually going to give you error. So no spaces, then main.py. So I've succeeded in creating a global variable. Now if I do my env and then scroll up, you see right here I have it located here, python. But let's say I do something like this. um Now if you look here, there's no way you're actually seeing that particular variable that I just created. You could look here. There's no way you're actually seeing that. this was because you see, right here when I did this export Wi-Fi and I did this env, you could notice that it's here, right? But now in this case, without me adding that export keyword, with just me doing this, you can see that it's not recorded in my list of global variables. So this particular variable only existed along this line, or rather along this instance. So if I want to be very, very explicit here, I could say along only within this process, because there was actually a process that ran this command. It gets, and I think um, to understand the concept about processes, you will need to go and read the starting up or building a simple shell, something like that. Yeah, during the simple shell project, just read about processes there. You just get to understand what processes is. Okay, so now my particular. Sorry, anybody has a question? Hello, anybody has a question?
No, no, no.
All right.
Not so far. I'm fine.
Okay. So now that my variable is actually set up, I could verify by doing this. Remember, I'll have to use the dollar symbol to signify that there should be an expansion here. Then the name of my variable. Now, because the name of my variable was in uppercase, that was why I'm actually typing this in uppercase. If this was in lowercase, like the name of my variable, when I did something like this, if this was in lowercase, I will have to use a lowercase when I want to do this. Hope you get the difference. It's very important. Or let me just show you. Now, if I do echo pyfi, you can see main.py is coming up. But however, if I change this to pyfi, if I change this to pyfi, you could see there's actually a character being printed there, which is the \n, and that's because by default, the echo command actually is actually going to print in a new line character after once it's done executing whatever command is being asked to do. So that's the reason why you're instead of actually getting the value of this spy file, you are not getting it. Instead, you are just only getting the new line character. Is that clear, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So now that I have my Python file, which is this, and I also have my variable, which is this, the next thing I just need to do is to actually write a shell script. Now, the shell script is just going to run this Python script. Okay, so the Python file name will be saved in the environmental variable. Okay, so if now let's do a testing first before you actually convert it to a script. And I think this particular stuff will actually help us moving on, because that's what basically I do. Before I kind of push it to GitHub, or I am very sure that okay, this works, even before the checker even actually checks it. Try as much as possible to actually run your own particular code or run your own answer project or file, and see if it's actually getting exactly the same thing as it's being shown on the particular task there. So let's just test this out. By default, if I actually want to run a Python file, I just have to do Python 3, then this, and I get this. Okay. Now, let's say uh this particular guy is not here. Now it's being saved in this particular variable called pyfile. So I'm just going to do substitution here. And as you can see, it's still run as though, wait, sorry, 1 minute. Okay. So as you can see, it still run as though I passed it indirectly. So now this becomes my answer file. So let's just put this, let's call this, and then okay. So this becomes my answer file. That goes for tax 1 or tax 0 in this case. Okay, so tax 1 here is saying you're actually going to run it inline. Now the difference between uh tax 0 and tax 1 is the fact that now, as in tax 0, you were actually holding a Python file, which in our case here was actually main.py. But in tax 1 here, you're actually holding a Python code directly, more like a raw string or a raw code, whichever one you want to call it. So as such, the way you're actually going to do it, it's actually going to be different. Now, how are you going to do that? You're actually going to use your concept of redirection. Now, in simple context, if you remember back then when you were starting out with, I think on onboarding, you were doing something like echo, then some text, blah blah blah, and then you do something like this, and that time you then do readme.md. Do we still remember this part of us that time? So basically, what was actually happening here is, instead of this guy to display to the standard output, which in this case is our string, yeah, sorry, which is our screen, is actually going to put that particular context in this particular file. Now, if this particular file is not existing, it's actually going to create it and then put it there. If it's existing, it's just going to overwrite it. Now, why will it overwrite it? Is because of there's actually a single greater than here. If I actually want to make it append, then I'll make it double. However, now this is for redirecting to a file. Now, if I want to actually make from a file, like let's say the content of a file becomes an input to another command. Now you could decide to pipe, but then you should understand the concept about piping. Piping is, let's say you run this command ls. Now the results of this, I think the best way I could just do this is, let's say I'm running a process. No, let's just say I want to do apt list. Now if I actually do this, you're actually going to display a bunch of things to my screen, but let's just say I'm only interested in MySQL, or should I say Unicorn? No, MySQL. Yes, I'm only interested in MySQL. Now what's actually happening is that this guy is actually going to generate a whole lot of results. Now the result is now like input to this guy here, and this guy is just basically going to scan through that and look for the one that is matching with my SQL. I could still further pipe this to then say, once it gets this, then I want to do apt, should I say apt-get in this case, install, then put in y for yes. Sorry, wait, let me admit someone. All right, so let's continue. Now I could actually do this, and you can see the output of apt list becomes an input to this. After processing, this becomes uh, input to this. But let's say I don't want to use the piping. Instead, I want to get from a file. Now you could kind of cut the file. cast the content of the file out, and then still pipe it the same thing. Thing you should it's that is advisable for us is to just redirect it to then be the input of this. However, if I do something, let's just or let's say I'm using df or whichever Linux command you are using, instead of kind of redirecting to a file, you can kind of use this one. Now, this one is actually going to get from that particular file. In this case, let's say this is main.py. Then the contents of this particular file becomes an argument to whatever command you pass in here. Sorry, I'm actually short of ideas on which particular exact command I can use, but that's just the whole concept here. But since our variable here is actually going to hold a Python code directly, so instead of me actually doing something like Python 3, then my name of my file, I will have to do something like this now. That was the whole essence of me going through those processes to kind of explain why this is there. Do we understand, please? At first, I I really didn't get the gist. But then if you do something like this, you will notice that by default, when you do something like Python 3 and then your name of the file, it's actually going to get this kind of instance around that particular file. You get, so let's just say this particular three. This was what how I was able to, because then we really had no time then, because this that period we really had time much to study much about this. So the short explanation I could just give myself then was the fact that okay, this particular guy by default is actually going to get input, like he's actually waiting for input now, right? So if I like switch this to, let's can call it lame thinking, whatever. But then that was what I actually did, and then it kind of worked for me. So I then said if I can switch this stuff to then run a particular code, because what I'm actually going to type in here now, let's say print. Now, guys, this is actually a Python code. Am I clear? Like, are we cool with this? It's actually a Python code. So if I'm actually going to change this symbol, then I should still be able to run the same Python code. So uh, I then tried it out and it kind of worked. So that was how I was able to tackle this particular project then. Okay, so talks 2 now is saying write a Python script that prints exactly programming is like a building. Just copy paste it. However, one thing you should note here is the fact that part of what you are printing is actually a a double quote. Yes, a double quote. So to do that, I think I'll just have to use that same Python stuff. So to do that, now you could do something like this and just copy and then paste. I could do something like this, and now you could see directly it works, including this guy. That's why this is actually working, is because the start of it I'm actually using a single quote. However, if you are cool with using double quotes, this will still work. The problem you only have is the fact that you have to put in a backslash here, and then you see if I don't put that backslash. Sorry, let me quickly admit someone. Please, if you have any question, you could just draw my attention to it. Please, I beg of you. Now, if I'm going to remove this backslash, yeah, now you can see there's a problem. The problem being that Python is actually going to, when it sees the first opening quote, is actually going to take that as the beginning of the string and mark the ending of the corresponding opening quotes at the end of the string. So it's seeing this as an empty string, but then it couldn't resolve what this is. That's basically what's happening. And then it's giving us a bunch of suggestions that probably we forgot a comma to signify that we're actually passing in more arguments. Because you could do something like print, then a string. Let's say it's just a white space. Then you could pass in more argument. Let's say your f flush, sorry, f flush, and then you put in your f flush parameter, and then you specify your end of line, your EOL in this case. Let's just say this is this. So this was what it was kind of suggesting to us. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So basically, this was what it just was trying to suggest to us because it was actually confused what we were actually trying to achieve. But if you look here, it's still same thing I did. However, I actually preceded this part here with a backslash. So this is actually just going to escape it. So is that part clear?
Yes.
Okay. So number three.
It's not clear to me because I think if you still quote the forward slash, backward slash like that, I think it's still the Python will consider it at that one. At the end of it, the end of the everything inside there. That only in that bracket we have only the backward slash.
The difference between this and this is the fact that this actually raised an exception, or let's just say raised an error, which is syntax error, and I explained why it raised that error because of this here. Now, I said if you really want to use this opening double quotes and this closing double quote, and you also want to print a double quote in your string, you have to put in this backslash here. Because if you notice in the very first one I did here, I didn't actually put in a backslash. But if you notice the opening quote here that's signifying that I'm printing a string, it's just a single quote. Now the closing one here is also a single quote. So what is inside is just being rendered as a string. But in this case here now, that the opening is a double quote and also the closing, it's a double quote. Yeah, opening is a double quote, closing is a double quote. It got confused what this particular part was, and you could see where the thing is actually coming from. The particular part where the error is actually coming from, it's from here, because it was able to resolve what this is, but it couldn't resolve what this is. That was why it's giving us this kind of suggestions. So are we cool?
Yes, now I'm okay.
Okay. So number three, you're saying complete the source code in order to print the integer stored in the variable. I'm just going to pass this directly. Let's say I have something like um yeah, let me say I have print, then I'm using I'll use f strings. Let's just say I have something like this, and then an integer, let's say a is equals 9 or 89. But let's just use what the 98, and then I call it. Sorry, I needed to admit someone. Okay. Now if I do some, oh sorry. Mm, okay. Now if I do something like this, um, let's just say this is what I have. But then instead of me passing in 98 directly, let's just say this is it. And then yeah, I'll change it to A. So I've succeeded in printing out this integer, and to some extent, this is actually the answer for. However, ALX being ALX, they like making things complicated, and then if you notice, if you actually push this to GitHub, because I did both. I did this and pushed to GitHub, and then I was having one check red. So I then realized that okay, the reason why it's actually marking it red is because I'm assuming that this is actually just going to be an integer. Sorry, this is actually going to be an integer, yes. But however, if a becomes a float value, now the question there is actually saying to print an integer. So if a now becomes a float value, and I still repeat it, you see I'm still printing out the same value. So that was where I was like, oh, so this is what they were actually trying to prevent me, and or they were actually saying I should prevent. Now, one way you could do this, I don't know if it worked, but because I didn't try it. But then one way, let's just say because I've passed that particular project. So, but one way you could actually still do something like this is if you do like typecast it. Let's just say this same stuff. And then typecast it to be an integer. And then typecast this to be an integer. If I print this, you still see it scales back to it. Although I didn't try this back then, but probably I'll try it out because the whole idea here is printing out an integer. So if a was actually a float and you do something like this, actually printing out a float, but then what I actually did was then specify inside here that I actually wanted to print an integer. Like what the disadvantage here is that if a is not an integer, it's actually going to raise an error. I think should be value error. That's the difference. But with this, I'm still able to print out this same stuff without it raising any error, because what is actually happening is just being typecasted to an integer. So that's just but as per the answer that is on my GitHub that I did then, this was it. But currently I'm proposing that this also should work, and this shouldn't even raise an error. So are we cool with it? Hello friends.
I don't really
I
understand
think,
the
yeah.
Okay, where don't you get, please?
where you added the D. I don't understand that part.
You don't understand where I added the D.
Yes, like why you added it, actually.
Okay, the D there is actually a format specifier. Like from your printf now, from C, percent %D is actually specifying it an integer, percent %F, you're actually specifying a float.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so the same thing, if you actually even do a Google search and do format specifiers for Python, you see you have D and a DF and a whole lot of others. I think there's CX. Yeah, if my memory still serves me well. But one that I could still remember clearly is D and F. There are other
All
format
right.
specifiers. So from there, that was how I got this D part.
Okay. So we don't need to add the percent, whatever it is.
Yup, you don't need to. You just have to specify that this is D, and then it's still
Okay,
going
it's
to
clear.
work.
All right, it's
Okay.
clear. Thank you very much.
All right, moving on. I think we have um tax 4 here. Tax 4, which is saying complete the source code in order to print whatever. So I'm thinking it's still a float value. However, they want you to print it to two decimal places. Yeah, in open that. But I think that's what we actually want to do. So let's say I have this. Let's say I have this. Yeah, we know it's going to raise this. But if I change this to this, you see that it's still going to print it. Okay. So let's say I want to print this. Um, let's say I want to print this using to two decimal places. We're still the same thing. Instead of me now putting D here, I already know it's a float, so I'll put F. But if I want to actually specify the number of points or places after the decimal, this point here is specifying the decimal point, like it's actually like a marker here, and then the number of digits after the decimal places. So let's say I just want 3 or 4 in this case. You can see it's just 4. If I change this to 2, it is 2. So so this becomes your answer to number 4. Is that part also clear?
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, number 5. Complete the source code in order to print 3 times a string stored in a variable str followed by the first 9 characters. All right. So I think what let's just try and explain that
Sorry,
with a
good evening.
sim.
Sorry, good
Yeah,
evening.
good evening.
Which I see that is like there's a question you are solving. Which question is that, please?
Hello?
You are reading a question. I just want to know if it's something
Yeah,
I
it's
have.
from the Python Hello World.
Okay, thank you.
So let's just say we have a string and let's call this, let's just use the same name. Let's call this Sammy. So this becomes my string. Verify this. Okay. So this is a string. Now the question here is I didn't bother of opening the source code, but I'm guessing inside that source code there will be a line there that says your code goes here, because that's what ALX normally does. Anytime they give you something like this, they'll tell you where your code should be. So now part of the requirements here is you shouldn't use a loop, because you could basically since you are coming from C, you could just use a for loop or any loop, and then this particular string will be printed twice or 3 times depending on the number of iterations you are doing on the loop. However, they said you shouldn't use a loop. That's one thing you should note. That you shouldn't use a loop. So your mind should now go about your normal operators. Now for Python, you have arithmetic and string operators. Now for your arithmetic operators, plus, you have plus, minus, multiplication, exponential, um, division, and sorry, oh, come on, absolute division. Okay, now these are what happens, or these are the operators that hold for integers. However, when it comes to a string, this is the only operators that holds. This is the only operator that holds. Now, how does this actually work? This plus operator here. This sorry, someone just sent me a mail and it's kind of funny. So this plus operator here is basically going to do concatenation. So let's just do this. So let's say I have this string here, and if I use this, I am saying that it's going to concatenate. By concatenation, is going to add two strings. Is exactly going to add it. This is what I mean by exactly. So if I do create a strings here, this string. You see, is you could see there's Sammy Kings. However, this same thing, if I change it to I add a white space, you could see there's a space. So it's basically just joining it together. That's why I say it's just going to do it exactly the way you passed it in. So that is for your addition. Now, if I switch this to this, now the next thing that's actually expecting here is an integer. So what this is actually going to do, let's say I do 2, is just going to, okay, it's just going to duplicate it along that same line. So let's say somewhere here, here I do this, and then I now you could see there's now a space, and there's also a space here as opposed this guy here when I did this. Are we cool? Hello? Are we cool with that, please?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
it's saying the output of the program should be, oh, let me just go back to there. So the output of the program should be 3 times the value of string of str followed by a new line, followed by 9 first characters of str. Okay, so let's just instead of 9 characters, let's just say first 2 characters, because from our own example here, str is just 5 characters, which is Sammy. So let's just say our own question here should be printing 3 times of str and the first 2 characters of str. So if I want to print this 3 times, I just need to change it to 3, and then it has printed it 3 times. Now if I want to print the first 2 characters, now I have to use this square bracket. Now this square bracket is actually an index, is actually specifying the index, either be it a string, a tuple, a list, or a dictionary. It's actually going to specify the index. Although you could still use other methods that will enable you get the indexes, but I think the square bracket is much more faster than you passing in more kind of other methods like this, or as the case may be. Yeah. So if I want to actually print the very first 2, I'll just do this very first 2. Now, since this is a string, the index is actually starting from 0. Now, from here, let's just count. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So if I'm actually going to print the very first 2, the very first 2 is S and A, right? So if I press enter, this should actually print S and A, of which it does. But you could still do something like this, 0, and you still get the same thing. Now the difference between this and this sub boils down to understanding. This is actually going to default to this, whichever way you want. Is that clear?
If hello,
Yes, but
if the
yes,
if
but
if the
One at a time, please. Okay, so the very first person.
okay. I said yes, but what if we the string now is 1 3? What's likely things to print?
Like if the
I
string
know
is
the
what?
3 is going to be SAM, but the 1 uncle.
Like I don't get what if yes, instead of 2 is 3?
is 3. We now have 1, 3. That 0 now should be 1. Then 1, 3.
What this is actually saying, okay, I think you will even, yeah, I think, let me just try this because I think somewhere along the question, they actually gave you a string and then they say from that string you should get a substring. So let's
Okay.
just say this string here has SAMMY. So if I want to get a substring, less possible substring I could get here is Sam, which is SAM. I can get AM, which is and I can also get my, which is MY. So let's say I want to actually want to get that. Now, this thank you again for your question, because I never really went there. I might really didn't go there. Now, this is actually the full form of it. Let's just say 0 and 0. So this is actually the full form. As I explained last week Sunday, this particular first part here is specifying your start off point. Now, if you don't specify this, by default it's going to be 0. So what I did in this case, I didn't specify the start off point. So it's kind of defaulted to 0, meaning starts from the beginning. Now, let's say I want to create a substring of Sam, like AM, then Sam. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually start from which is A, right? By default, the index of A is 1. So I'll put 1. Now I want to stop at 3. This is it. 0, 1, 2, 3. Now this stop is actually for people that actually understand math, it's actually n minus 1. So if I'm saying I want to stop at 3, so
People understand me.
so if I say sorry, so if I say I actually want to stop at 3, now if this evaluates, now 3 minus 1, guys, is 2, right?
That's, yeah, 2.
So it's actually going to start at
Yes.
1, which is 0, 1, and stop at index 2. So here is 0, here is 1, here is 2. So it's actually going to get A and M. So this is 2. Now this here is the skip. Like if I want to repeat this, how what are the steps I should go? Like let's just put it as though you are kind of doing multiplication table. Now let's say you are doing 2 multiplication table or 3 multiplication table. You observe along the line that you are actually moving in steps of 2s, like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, or 3, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and so on and so forth. So this last part here is actually specifying the skip. Now, if you still don't put this, it's just going to default to 0. Sorry. It's going to default to 0. So
I have a question.
Okay.
You said you are going to stop at 3.
Yep.
Why? I think there you should write 4 instead
I
of
want to
2.
stop. No, 3.
Because are you doing slicing? Me, according to the way I understand it, is that you start from 1. When you are going to stop at 3, you are including 4, because in Python, if, for example, if you write there 3, they won't tackle that. They'll stop in 2.
Yeah, that was why I actually did this n minus 1. So if I say I want to stop at 3, is if this evaluates, it becomes 2. So if I put 3 here, it's actually going to stop at index 2, which is 0, 1, 2. So it's going to start at index 1, which is A, and stop at index 2. But however, it is 3 I put in there. What is actually happening is that this is what is the operation that is actually happening there. So is that clear now?
No, I'm still floating.
Okay, whichever way you understand the slicing, basically you're doing string slicing. So if you say you want to stop at 3, what is actually going to happen is 3n minus 1. So instead of it stopping at 3, it will stop at 2. If I put 2, it will stop at 1.
Yeah, now I can get you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So do this, if you do this, it will mean that by default the skip is 0. If you still do this, it still means your skip is 0, except you put in a value. That's just what it is. So let's say I want to print just yeah. You see, I have am. Now let's do this, and so now I want to start at the beginning. So I can put 0 or I can leave that blank. Now I want to stop at the 0, 1, 2, and 3. So yeah, I'll still put the same thing. Then I'll close this. So you can see now from this string here, I've actually created 2 substrings, and I can still do something like this. And then if I do new string, something like this. Yeah, I just wanted to have something like this, like that is like a sentence. But this is what actually happening here. From this strings, I mean, I sliced out am from this here, and then I also sliced out some using this. And what concatenation does is just added it. That's why you have some here. But what I wanted was like a sentence whereby there's a space. So that's why I then added this to it. So is that clear now?
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you.
So I think we have
Yes, yes.
done with that single explanation. We are able to cover 5 and 6. Yep. Okay, no, 6 is talking about concatenation of 2 strings, of which we've covered before. 7 is copy and paste, which is this string slicing, which we just did now. 8 is creating a new string from a substring, which you still did now. So whoever that asked that question, God bless you. Now, 9, yeah. This particular one was very tricky for me, really, because I was really thinking, should I just kind of go and start writing Zen of Python? So what actually came true for me was me actually doing a Google search, and I just realized that you just actually need to import the library called this. So if you do import this, you basically print out the Zen of Python. So that's just it. Import this, and then you print Zen of Python. I think they call it StarX. I don't know why. Whoever that is giving ALX inspiration for file names, they're actually trying, because the file names can be very crazy sometimes. Okay, number 10 here is linked list. Let me just explain the linked list. If I'm really going to do this, is going to take a lot of time, and I'm really out of time here. So this particular task, which is task 10 here, basically saying that you have a list. Somebody's mic is on, so please mute yourself. All right, thank you. Now, this particular task, which is task 10, if you look closely, the very first part here, you kind of have your header files, which is list.h. You just need to just copy and paste it. You don't need to do anything here. Now the next one here, which they did cat 10 link list.c. Now the very first function there, which is print list int, is the code that basically prints all elements of the linked list. The add node int basically adds a node, and then the free list basically frees the node. Now the cat 10 main.c is actually the main file that adds a node, checks if the node has a circle in it, prints the node, and also frees the nodes. So we already have the code that basically add, prints, freeze it. Our only job is to create a function file, of which they've given us the function. You just create a function file that checks if there is a circle. Now, if you want to do this, you will need just 2 pointers. You will need just 2 pointers for it. Now, you will move when you're traversing your linked list. You move um one pointer. You move one pointer twice the speed of the other. So let's say I have 2 pointers A, B, pointing to the head of the node. Let's say A is pointing to let's say A is pointing to the head of the node. Now I'm going to move A 2 times, then B once. Now if the value of A, you know that because A is moving twice the speed of B, at some point A will still come back round and meet B. Do we get the analogy?
To a, I'm not getting it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay, so this is what I'm actually saying. You have a node now. Let's just visualize it. You have a node now, or let's just say you have 4 buckets placed parallel to each other. Now, then you have 2 people, or let's just say 3 people now. The very first person is pointing to the starting point of the bucket. Now, the remaining two are variables that you created. Now, you pick one of those variables and point it to the head of that particular node. Now, that first variable that you created, which is actually a pointer in C, you will move it 2 times. You know that from a node actually has like 3 parts. No, sorry, is a linked list, not a doubling linked list now. A linked list actually has 2 parts, the data and a pointer to the next node. Now, since this is a linked list, instead of me moving it 1 times the speed, like from, since A now is pointing to the very first bucket, I then move from A, then point A, that A to, instead of pointing A to bucket 1, I then point A to bucket 2. Do we get it now? So instead of me pointing A to bucket 1 first, then move A to bucket 2, then move B to bucket 1, I am moving A straight up from, instead of pointing to bucket 1, I'm moving A to point to bucket 2. Do we get it now? So A is kind of moving 2 times the speed of B. Now, if there is a circle, A at some point will equals B because the addresses will be the same. Now, if there is no circle, A will not be equal to B. So that's just the analogy. So let's just see if I have something like A is equal to, let's say the address is let's say the address is this, and I move this 2 times that of B. Right. And I move this 2 times the speed of B. If A is equal to B, therefore means that there is actually a circle. It would have been perfect if I could actually visualize this diagram. Let's see. That means I have to close this tab.